okay.
Okay.
Yeah, not everybody's going to be on the list, apparently. Okay. So we're going to talk about infrared photography. We're going to actually do a lot with infrared tonight. We're going to go a little bit into the science of infrared, what infrared is. It always helps to have an understanding of what we're dealing with. And infrared is something that we can't see. So it's a little bit different than, any other form of photography that we do. Let me share my screen. Actually, yeah. Okay, there's something else in the chat window. Before I do that, let me see what that is. Okay, nothing important. Okay. And I'm going to minimize this. Okay. I think we're all set. I just want to make sure everything is set up. For some reason, where is Zoom? There it is. Okay. All righty. So, infrared photography. First, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've been in photography in one way or another since I was probably 8 years old. At about 10 years old, I was shooting parades locally in Boston and selling the pictures to the firemen who were in those parades. I built a darkroom on my own. I had a slide, an enlarger built out of from a slide viewer, and I figured out all the chemistry. And I was making 8 by 10 black and white pictures when I was 12 years old. I ended up apprenticing with a professional photographer in Boston in the late 60s. I did photography, and I've been doing photography instruction, film and digital since 1969. I teach Photoshop. I've done workshops for about 12 to 15 years. I was doing workshops in the Everglades National Park, Joshua Tree National Park, and Monument Valley Tribal Park. I also publish PhotoBird cheat sheets for Nikon and Canon. I don't know if does anybody have a cheat sheet from us? No? Okay.
Actually, I've got a number of yours, Bernd.
Okay, who's that?
That's Fred.
Fred. Okay.
I have about 4 of yours.
Oh, okay. So we have cheat sheets we've been publishing since 1969. Not 1969, from 1996. A little dyslexic there. And we sell through B&H and Adorama and some other camera stores as well. Okay. So what are we going to talk about tonight? First of all, we're going to touch on what is light, light that we normally see, the visible light. We're going to talk about infrared, what infrared is. We're going to talk about why you might want to shoot infrared. We're going to talk about all of the different sensor conversions you can do and the camera conversions. We're going to give a whole bunch of examples of different kinds of infrared photography. We'll talk about what photographs well with infrared. I'm going to show you some camera tools that I use that I find extremely useful with infrared. We're going to talk about JPEG versus RAW shooting in infrared. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things to consider when you shoot infrared, things that are really important that you need to know about. And we'll give you some references. So, what is light and what is infrared? Well, infrared is a look into the invisible world of infrared energy. Robert Wood is considered the father of infrared photography. He actually invented something called Wood's glass. And Wood's glass was a filter, something akin to an 850 nanometer infrared filter today, that allowed ultraviolet and infrared to pass but blocked most visible light. He took the very first infrared images. The look of his images was called the Wood effect, where leaves have the bright white look that we now come to expect from infrared photography. And this is an image that was taken in 1910 on experimental film that Robert Wood created. So he is truly the father of infrared photography. And this was, he was doing this in the early 1900s. Infrared photography can create surreal color landscapes or high contrast black and white. We can do either one. And when we do color, we're basically mixing visible light and infrared. But we can also shoot pure infrared, which is going to be purely black and white. So what is light? Light, and we're talking about visible light, is nature's way of transferring energy through space. So what we're saying here is that light is energy. It's electromagnetic energy, and it's moving through space, and we see it. And this is what we call visible light. Photography is all about light. It's from the Greek drawing with light, and as photographers, maybe the hardest lesson for many photographers to learn is that you're not really taking a picture of a subject. You're really taking a picture of the light that's falling on the subject. So we deal with light as photographers. So light is electromagnetic energy. It's moving through space and we see it. Visible light is a tiny portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. So this is a diagram of the electromagnetic spectrum. And you can see in the middle there where we have color between UV, ultraviolet, and infrared, we see the visible spectrum. And we see it as color. And it's the only place in the electromagnetic spectrum that color exists. Now, I actually have to modify that. This is what I've been telling people for years. There are people who can actually see ultraviolet. Certain birds can see ultraviolet. They actually have an extra cone in their eyes where they can see ultraviolet, but people typically can't. But some people can, and I don't know what the reason for this is, but they tend to say that the ultraviolet looks like a pale blue. So kind of interesting. But the only place color exists typically is within the visible light spectrum. So as we get to infrared, there is no color. That's why true infrared photography is black and white. Most of the light around you, or most of the energy around you, is invisible. We have ultraviolet, we have infrared, there are microwaves, there are radio waves, hopefully not too many X-rays, but we have all of these things around us all the time. So, the electromagnetic spectrum is measured by the wavelength in nanometers, and it's abbreviated NM, which is a billionth of a meter. Now, if you looked at these waves on an oscilloscope, you see a sine wave like this red curvy line that we have here. And as we, at the lower end, towards gamma rays, we have the waves are very close. As we get out towards microwave and radio, you see they are wider apart. The measurement of how wide apart the peaks are on the sine waves is measured in nanometers. And that's how we're going to measure frequency in infrared. So the electromagnetic spectrum, basically of the visible light, is what we show here. We see it goes from 400 to 750 nanometers. 400 to 430 is violet, 430 to 500 is blue, so forth. And we have each color is within a certain range. Well, this isn't very important to us, obviously, with infrared because we're not going to be shooting visible light. But we will be shooting some visible light. Maybe. Depends on how you shoot it. Infrared goes from 750 nanometers to 1,000,000 nanometers. Okay, now that's a huge range. Visible light covers a spectrum of 350 nanometers. Infrared covers a range of 999,250 nanometers, which is about 2,800 times as big as visible light. So infrared covers a huge range, and there are many types of infrared, or several types of infrared. We only photograph in something called near infrared. Our camera sensors can see infrared from about 700 to about 1,200 nanometers. Some sensors only see to about 1,000 nanometers. So we're typically photographing between 700 and 1,000 nanometers. Our sensors cannot see beyond that. Some people may ask the question about photographing heat, and we cannot do that with our cameras because heat is in the range of far infrared, which is way beyond 1,000 nanometers. So our cameras can't see that. So if you ever had an energy inspection at your house and they photograph your house in infrared to see where the heat leaks are, you can't do that with your cameras. That won't work in infrared photography, unfortunately. That requires specialized equipment. So we can see infrared, but some animals can. For instance, mosquitoes rely on infrared to find your veins, and they do a very good job of it. Snakes can sense heat in the dark. That's how they find their prey. Salmon and frogs use infrared so they can see in murky water. And one of the things that we're going to see with infrared is infrared can see through things. So one of the things it can do, and unless you're going to take your infrared camera underwater, you're probably not going to be able to test this very well, but it can see through murky water. And I'm going to show you some examples of seeing through murky air. And one of the things that infrared can do is see through haze, which is really neat. Okay, so we can't see infrared, but it's all around us, especially on a sunny day. We photograph in the near infrared wavelengths. That's roughly between 700 and 1,000 nanometers. Longer wavelengths can be felt as heat, but again, there's no heat in near infrared. More than half the sun's light, or more than half the sun's energy, is a better way to phrase it, is infrared. So on a sunny day, a sunny day is your best source of lighting for infrared photography. As you can see here, 53% of the sun's energy is infrared, 44% visible light, and 3% ultraviolet. So it's mostly infrared, but a lot of that infrared is beyond what we can capture with our cameras. So this chart kind of shows you what we can capture with our cameras from sunlight. About 37% of the solar near infrared is visible to our cameras. So if you look at that pink area, the salmon colored area, you see between 700 nanometers and 1,000 nanometers. And we see near infrared ends at 1,500 nanometers. So we can see about 37% with our cameras of the near infrared that the sun emits. So even though there's more infrared emitted from the sun than there is visible light, we can't use all of it, but we can use quite a bit of it. And as we see, visible light is about the same area. So we get to use about the same amount of visible light from the sun as we do infrared. So shooting on a sunny day is absolutely your best source for infrared energy. So infrared can travel through thick smoke, dust, or fog, and far infrared, which we can't photograph, can actually travel through materials, certain materials. Infrared is very different than visible light. Things that reflect infrared will be white. Things that don't reflect it will be black. So if you look at this image, you see that the sky and the water are black. Okay, why? Because they don't reflect infrared. The foliage and the clouds are white because they do reflect infrared. So basically, that's what determines whether something is white or black. And this is a pure infrared image. There's no visible light in this image, therefore it's black and white. So, just to reiterate, things that reflect infrared are white, things that don't reflect infrared are black. Here's an image that was taken with visible light. It's a picture of the moon when it was just rising. It was taken on a sunny day about 2 hours before sunset. So basically, the moon is fairly low in the sky. When it's low in the sky, we have a lot of haze. So the moon is visible, but it's not what we'd call crisp. We see some clouds below it. This was actually taken a few minutes after the next picture I'm going to show you. This next picture was taken a few minutes before this one, and it was taken with infrared. And it was taken with the same focal length, same lens, same camera. But with the same camera, with one camera, I'm able to shoot visible light photography and infrared. And you can see the difference. And we cut through all of the haze. The moon is incredibly crisp and sharp. The clouds are visible. The sky, the blue sky, is pure black. Why? Because it does not reflect infrared. The moon does. Certain parts of it reflect more than others. Therefore, we see the changes in tonality. And the clouds reflect a lot of infrared. Therefore, they're white. So, why shoot infrared? Well, the best thing about shooting infrared is that midday is the perfect time. Whenever you take pictures, we all know that the best time to shoot for photography is when the light is warm and casts long shadows. That means the golden hour, an hour after sunrise or an hour before sunset. But the rest of the day is perfect for infrared. Matter of fact, sunrise and sunset is also pretty good for infrared, but you won't get the color. Visible light is just okay in midday. Visible light photography can take nice snapshots, but then they don't have a lot of impact. But visible infrared photography midday, these images can have a lot of impact. So one of the things that I have here in this presentation is a number of examples of shooting visible light and infrared, same exact images, which is going to help you decide how you want to do your conversion. But we'll get into that as we get further in. Very often, your infrared will surprise you. I can't tell you how many times I've been surprised by infrared. Sometimes a seemingly boring scene comes out amazing. You end up shooting like a tourist. And I will tell you, I take pictures of the weirdest things with infrared just to see how it will come out. And very often I'm surprised. Very often I'm not. But because you can't see infrared, you really don't know how something's going to come out until you shoot it and you process it. As we're going to see, although you don't have to do post-processing for infrared, post-processing, like in regular photography, really is helpful to get a better image. So when you take the picture, this is kind of what it looks like. So this was shot with an 850 nanometer filter, and it comes out purple, kind of a magenta tint to it. You really don't know what it looks like. This is the black and white image is what was created after post-processing. But you need to post-process in order to get good images. It's a new creative outlet. You will find that pictures, midday, this picture in color, in visible light, would be nice, but might be a postcard, but it doesn't have the impact that the infrared image has. The dark sky, the shadows are tend to be exaggerated a little more with infrared. The stark white leaves, it almost looks like a cherry blossom time in Washington, D.C., but it wasn't. Okay, so I mentioned that IR cuts through haze. Infrared can see through haze. You saw the first image at the top right, but let's look at the bottom left. This was taken on top of a mountain in Vermont, and it was taken, slightly different times because obviously the person moved, and actually they were taken with two different cameras. But if you look at the visible picture on the left, the mountains are hazy. You've probably all seen this, where you take a picture at altitude, and where you can see quite a distance, and there's haze, and you really can't see any detail in the mountains. But look at the mountains in the infrared image. It completely cuts through that haze. It's like it's not even there. So infrared has some interesting abilities to cut through haze. It can cut through smog in the air. It can cut through water vapor in the air at the ocean. It does interesting things that you can't see typically with your eyes. It shows us a world normally hidden from us. This image on the left has a small pond, which is very muddy, and it's brown in the water. But look at this false color image in infrared. It's pure blue, the water, completely different. Obviously, the foliage is completely different as well. But, when I took this, I really didn't expect the water to come out this color. And later on, I'll show you another image where the water came out a completely different color, and it shocked me. I just had no idea. So very often you're taking pictures with infrared and you're getting results that you didn't expect. So that's why I said you end up shooting like a tourist. You start taking pictures of things you normally might not take, and you will be surprised sometimes. By the way, if anybody has questions, feel free to ask them. Again, if you used your space bar, you should be able to unmute yourself if you hold the space bar down, and you'll mute yourself when you let it back up again. Okay, so let's talk about converting your sensor in your camera. So all digital sensors can see visible, ultraviolet, and near infrared. But the problem is that if the manufacturer let infrared, ultraviolet, and visible come through, color would look really bad. So what they do is they put something called a hot mirror filter in the front of the sensor. So it's basically, if you look at your sensor, you probably see that it has a bluish tint to it, a bluish green tint to it. That's the hot mirror filter. That blocks, so it's just like Robert Wood's Wood's glass filter. It blocks infrared and ultraviolet. So it's just the opposite of Wood's filter, actually. It blocks yep.
Bert, I've always wondered, why do they call it a hot mirror filter? If you could elucidate on that.
I'm afraid I can't. I've actually wondered the same thing. I don't know. It's called, there's another name for it too, and I forget what the other name is. I want to say it's a low pass filter because it's letting visible light pass below infrared. But yeah, I think it's called a low pass filter as well. But why they call it hot mirror, I don't know. It's just the terminology, and somebody came up with that, and that's what it's called. But it blocks most infrared and ultraviolet. Now you notice I have the word most in yellow and in bold because it does not block all. Has anybody ever shot with a 10-stop neutral density filter and got a result they didn't expect, a reddish tint to their image? No? Okay. Most 10-stop or more neutral density filters do not block infrared. So what I'm saying here is that this hot mirror filter blocks most of the infrared, but it doesn't block all of it. So if we take a long enough exposure, infrared will impact our image, even if we don't have a converted camera. So very often, neutral density filters are now, a lot of them now are being manufactured and they're being called IRNDs, infrared neutral density. So that are blocking infrared, because your colors will be off with a 10-stop neutral density filter if it's not treated for infrared. So a little infrared does get through the hot mirror filter, which means you can take infrared pictures with a non-converted digital camera if you have an infrared filter. But the problem is the exposures are going to be very long because some infrared is getting through. So if you put an infrared filter in front of your lens that only allows infrared to pass, and then it gets to the hot mirror filter, which blocks most of it, some of it's getting through. And if the exposure is long enough, you're going to get a valid infrared image. So here's two images. The image is going to be toggling back and forth. And the first image is taken, well, they were both taken with a non-converted Nikon DA10. The normal image was exposed at is the same ISO and the same f-stop. The only thing that changed was the shutter speed. So the normal image in a bright sunny day was shot at a 2,000th of a second at f5.6, ISO 800. The IR image was exposed the same ISO and f-stop, but 20 seconds, 16 times the normal image. And I had an 850 nanometer IR filter, which only allowed 850 nanometer and higher to get through the lens, get to the sensor. So you can see that it's a perfectly valid infrared image. The problem is it's a 20-second exposure. So obviously you need a tripod. You're not going to handhold that. And you need an 850 nanometer or other frequency IR filter. And it's perfectly valid to shoot infrared without a converted camera. It's just you're going to have long exposures. And, you know, out in the street, when I shot this, several cars drove by, but you don't see them because they didn't impact the exposure. So let's talk about the camera sensor. So in front of the camera sensor, we have something called the hot mirror filter. And you see that visible light is getting through, but IR and UV is being blocked. By the way, the sensor has that red-green, the red-green-green-blue matrix because that's something called a Bayer matrix. The Bayer is a Bayer filter, B-A-Y-E-R. It's as a side note, which I'm going to guess not a lot of people realize, all of your camera sensors only see black and white. They do not see color. And this Bayer filter is in front of the sensor. So if you have a 24 megapixel sensor, there are 24 million little red, green, blue pixels. And there's twice as many green as there are red because our eyes are twice as sensitive to green as they are blue or red. And based on this, every pixel sees a shade of gray. The camera knows whether that's seeing a shade of red gray, blue gray, or green gray. And a really complex algorithm figures out how to make an image out of this, which is truly remarkable, but that's another story. So the hot mirror filter is on every camera. Now, somebody had asked a question about the anti-aliasing filter. Cameras always had anti-aliasing filters until, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. They started making some cameras without them. And when they did that, the pictures got sharper, but there was a problem with something called moire. If you took a picture of somebody with a striped shirt, you might see these moire lines within the image, which would be a little weird looking. The anti-aliasing filter actually made pictures a little less sharp, but it eliminated moire. But eventually, manufacturers realized that people really didn't care too much about moire. Shooting people with striped shirts wasn't too frequent, and they removed the filters. If you do a conversion, that anti-aliasing filter is removed as part of the process. But you'd have to check with whoever's doing your conversion. But they typically do remove it. So the hot mirror filter is that greenish blue filter that's in front of your sensor, and basically that is just removed. And when they do that, you now have something called a full spectrum converted sensor, which allows infrared, visible, and ultraviolet to pass through the sensor. Now, without that hot mirror filter in place, everything gets through. So after removing the blocking filter, the camera is now full spectrum. Full spectrum meaning it can see UV, visible, and near infrared. The viewfinder autofocus system, there are two, if in DSLRs, there are two different autofocus systems. One is for the viewfinder, which basically where the image is coming across a mirror, through a mirror, and the other is for the LCD, for live view. But the viewfinder autofocus system needs to be adjusted with single frequency conversions with DSLRs. As light focuses at a different point, infrared light focuses at a different point than visible light does. So you can actually, and this is going to vary, the focusing is going to vary by lens. You can actually send a lens to whoever's doing the conversion, and they will convert it for that lens. But typically, most people don't do that. I'm going to explain how I shoot and how I don't have any problem with focus. And one of the things that I do is I rarely shoot at wide open. So if I typically shoot at f8, make sure I get enough depth of field. I'm typically shooting with a wide angle lens, so I never have a problem. But if you're shooting with live view, which if you have a DSLR, you have to shoot live view. If you're shooting with a mirrorless camera, you can shoot with the electronic viewfinder or through the LCD on the back, either way, because either way you're shooting with an LCD. But DSLRs are a little bit different, and I'm going to show you because I shoot with a DSLR. But if you're shooting live view, you don't have to worry about this because you're focusing right on the sensor and there's no adjustment needed. So if you're doing a conversion for infrared, you have two choices. It's really three, but one is sort of a hybrid. Choice one is to convert to a single infrared frequency. This way you replace the IR blocking filter, the hot mirror filter, with one that allows one infrared frequency or higher of light to reach the sensor. So if you put an infrared filter, as the diagram shows, if that's an 850 nanometer filter, your sensor can now see 850 nanometer to 1000 nanometer. Can't see below that. If you choose a 650 nanometer filter, your sensor can now see from 650 nanometer to 1000 nanometer. So we have in 650 nanometer, you'll recognize as being below that 700 to 750 nanometer beginning of infrared, which means at 650 nanometer, your sensor is now seeing some visible light in addition to infrared. But you can choose with a single frequency conversion, you have to choose what frequency you want. Most people choose a frequency of either 590 or 650 nanometer because that gives them the option of using a higher frequency filter if they want. We'll talk more about that. Second choice is to do what we showed in the examples before, a full spectrum, which means the hot mirror filter is just removed. And now you don't replace it with anything, or they replace it with a clear filter typically. And now the sensor can see ultraviolet, visible, and infrared. Sees everything, full spectrum. With a full spectrum conversion, the nice thing about this is you can still take normal visible light images, but you always need to use a filter to take any picture. If you want to take visible light, you need a filter. If you want to take infrared, you need a filter. So the difference is if you're shooting, if we go back here to a single frequency conversion, here you don't need to use filters. You can use filters. For instance, if you do a 650 nanometer, a lower frequency, you can put a filter. For instance, you can put an 850 nanometer filter on, and now your sensor only sees 850 to 1000. So you don't have to shoot with a single frequency. You don't have to put a filter on your lens. But with a full spectrum, you do. You always have to have a filter.
So, Bert, can we ask you which way you shoot, which way you went?
I went full spectrum. Actually, I didn't go full spectrum. I went the hybrid, and I'm going to show you that now. Well, I'll tell you about it. I have another slide coming up where I mention it, but you can also do something called a two-spectrum conversion. A two-spectrum conversion, they basically put a UV filter in front of the sensor. So it's kind of like shooting with a 1A filter, a skylight filter, or a UV filter. But they put it in front of there. So your sensor can't see UV. There's no practical use of UV photography as far as I know. UV photography, I mean, the sun emits 3% UV, which isn't very much, so you're not going to get it during the day. Typically, scientific stuff is done with UV, but I don't know any practical use. So why I did two spectrum as opposed to full spectrum, I can't tell you. Seemed like the right choice. I said to myself, I'm never going to shoot UV, so let's do a two spectrum. So that's what I did. But it's equivalent to a full spectrum, basically. There's really no difference. Except I always have a skylight filter in front of my sensor, if that makes any sense. So let's define something called false color. When a sensor can see both visible and infrared, images are rendered with false color. The image at the top right is a very extreme example of false color. This is taken with a special filter called a chrome IR filter. If for those of you, and I know at least one person shot infrared film in the day, this is equivalent to shooting Kodachrome or Ektachrome Aerochrome film, which we'll be talking about later. The image at the bottom is a tree in a park. We see blue sky. Well, that's not sky blue. That's not the normal color of the sky. It's actually rendered by the camera as red, but we don't see the sky as red because we do some manipulation in Photoshop. But you see the grass is white, which of course grass wouldn't be white, it would be green. It was taken in winter, so there's no leaves on the trees. I think it was taken in fall, actually, late fall. But these are false color. So when you take infrared images that have color, we call them false color images because they're not real color. It's just they're false color. So if you're shooting if you do a single IR frequency conversion, the sensor is limited to seeing that frequency of light and higher, up to the limit of the sensor, which is about 1,000 to 1,200 nanometer. So one of the things, if we look at this image at the bottom right, we see the visible light spectrum from 400 to 700, and then we see infrared up to 1,000. So the idea is, if we do, well, first of all, let's talk about the common frequencies. Here are some of the common frequencies you could do with a single IR frequency conversion. You could convert to 550 nanometer. This sees a fair amount of visible light between 550 and 750 nanometer, and it sees infrared above 750 nanometer. So you're mixing visible with infrared, which means we get a lot of false color. You could do 590 nanometer. This sees a little less visible light than 550, but it still shows a lot of false color. 665 nanometer sees very little visible light and mostly infrared, but it does see some visible light, so we get some false color. 720 sees a very little amount of visible light. This is sometimes called the standard IR filter. A lot of people like this IR filter a lot because it gives very little false color, but it gives a touch. And typically, the only false color you're going to see is blue sky. That kind of weird blue sky that you get with infrared. This is a very common one. There's nothing standard about it. I mean, I rarely shoot with 720 nanometer, but I'll explain. You'll see why in a minute. 850 sees only infrared, so visible light goes up to 750 nanometer. 850 sees only from 850 nanometer and up, which there is no color in infrared. Therefore, we get high contrast black and white. And this is actually my favorite. I like the black and white, but not always. You're going to see some images come out really, really great with false color. But some images I prefer in black and white. So let's take a look at this. This is going to cycle through a bunch of different filters. The first one was visible light, and you saw the purple tulips. And with each different filter, you're going to see varying amounts of false color. And as we go higher, we get less false color until finally we get to 850, which is black and white. So it's going to cycle through again. We look at the visible light image. It's starkly different than the infrared. This is 590, a lot of false color, and really all we're getting is blues in here. With 680, we get a little less blue, a little darker, a little less luminance in the blue. 720 is just a little bit of false color in the sky, in the trees. And at 850, we get pure black and white. So this kind of walks you through all the different frequencies. Now, I will say this, is that with infrared, you have a lot of creative control. You can make infrared images, you can change the colors. Because these are false colors, you could change colors and who would know? Sometimes they look better. So you could decide you want your sky to be a different shade of blue. It's certainly easy to do in Lightroom or Photoshop. You could, very often, you can say, I don't want the foliage to be yellow like it is here. I'd rather have my foliage white. And, you have that creative control. So with a full spectrum conversion, you can also shoot normal visible light photography. So just so you know, if we look at this image, and this image was taken with the same camera, one camera with a full spectrum conversion, or two spectrum, with different filters. All I did was the camera was on a tripod. I basically put one filter after another in front of the lens, took a picture. So you see that I was capable of taking visible light images. The first one with the purple tulips was visible light, obviously. So with a full spectrum conversion, you can do that. You can take normal images with your converted camera. And you can also shoot different IR frequencies with filters. Every image requires a filter. So basically, you have to use a filter. The filter on the left, that light blue one, is a hot mirror filter. So if you put that in front of your lens, you're literally taking normal photography. Instead of being on the sensor, it's now in front of the lens. So for normal images, not infrared, you can use the viewfinder or LCD of a DSLR to compose and shoot. And you need a hot mirror filter. It's also called a UV IR cut filter. But the thing is, you could do this with mirrorless or DSLR. I don't know how many people are shooting mirrorless. I haven't gone there yet. But if you're shooting a DSLR, you can use either viewfinder or LCD. We're going to see that with a DSLR, you have to shoot with the LCD for infrared. So with infrared images, you must use the LCD with a DSLR using live view and use an infrared filter of your choice. So you could choose whatever filter you want, 590, 665. You're going to find different frequencies. There may be a 580, there may be a 690, but they're all, you get the idea. They're all within a range. But you get to shoot whatever you want, whatever frequency of infrared you want, whatever filter you put in front of your lens, you're going to shoot that frequency and higher. Auto focus and exposure work as expected with live view with a DSLR, although I generally underexpose. I like to shoot 850 nanometer mostly, which is black and white. It tends to be very high contrast, and it's very easy to blow out your highlights. So I tend to underexpose by 1 1/3 stops, to avoid underexposing. But the basically using the auto exposure system and autofocus system, they work. I don't even think about it. Works perfectly. I just keep my exposure compensation set on minus 1.3. So filters are high pass, which means they allow frequencies above their rating to pass through, but they block frequencies below their rating. So if we would take a 590 nanometer, let's see if I can get my pointer here. No, that's not what I want. Hold on. There it is. Annotate spotlight. Okay. Well, what happened here? Well, okay. I'll circle it. I don't know why my spotlight's not working. If we were to use a 590 nanometer filter, basically we would get everything from, whoops, not too straight there. Everything from 590 nanometer up would be passing through the filter. So we would be getting a fair amount of visible light from here to here, and everything above that, we'd be getting infrared, near infrared. So 590 gets a lot of visible light. 720 obviously would get less. 850 obviously only gets infrared. So that's the way the filters work. Let's see. I'm trying to get my... I don't know why it won't do that. I should be able to change my cursor here, but it doesn't seem to want to do that. There we go. Okay. You can see the red cursor here. Let's clear the drawing. Okay. Let's move next. Okay, so if you do a single frequency conversion less than 850, you can add more restrictions. So let's say you did a 590 nanometer single frequency conversion. So you could go out and shoot without a filter, and you'd be shooting 590 nanometer and higher, which means you'd be getting a lot of false color. However, if you wanted to shoot pure black and white, you could add an 850 nanometer filter to the front of your lens. And when you do that, you're basically getting from 850 and higher. Okay, but you still would not be able to take visible light images because it's not a full spectrum. You'd have to, we're talking about a single IR frequency. So you could do any of these. If you did 590, then what you're getting is everything from 590 higher, and you could put in a 665 filter, you could put a 720 filter, you could put an 850 filter. If you get a 720 nanometer single frequency conversion, then the only filter you could put on is 850 nanometer. So you kind of get the idea. Full spectrum lets you do any frequency, but you always have to have a filter. There are specialty filters you can get for astrophotography. I did not take this image. I wish I could say I did. I do not live in a dark place. I do not have a telescope, but I do love astrophotography. Blue IR filters, which captures blue plus IR, has a very strange effect. This is typically used in agricultural photography. It's not typically used by most photographers. You can get a filter called an IR chrome filter. There's only one source for this, and it's Kolari Vision. Kolari Vision is the company I use to do my conversion. I recommend them highly. They're very good at what they do. And they sell filters, and one of the filters they sell is this IR chrome filter. Now, back in the day, we had this Ektachrome professional infrared film. And this film was developed for the military. I'm going to tell you the story behind it in a minute, which is pretty fascinating. But if we look at this picture, we see that everything in the picture looks normal except for the foliage. The foliage is red. So basically, foliage comes out red with this filter, and everything else is pretty much the same. When you use a chrome IR filter, there's almost no post-processing to be done. You don't have to do anything. Literally. I mean, you don't have to, but of course you could tweak your image in Photoshop or Lightroom if you wanted. But for the most part, this is a very interesting filter. Foliage comes out red. You can still buy Ektachrome infrared film, believe it or not. This is an auction on eBay for 6 rolls of Kodak Ektachrome infrared film. It expired in January 1992, but you can still buy it, and it is about $40 a roll. So why you'd want to do this, I don't know. Back in the day, I shot this film, and basically because you don't know what you're getting, you're not sure of the exposure. You shoot, 36 exposures, and you were lucky to get 2 or 3 decent images. But, you can still buy this film. Now, I can tell you what Kolari Vision did is they bought this film on eBay, maybe not this auction, but they bought some film, and they worked and worked and worked until they got a filter, a chrome, which they call Chrome IR. They worked until they got this filter to emulate this film almost exactly. They got an exact, and if you go on their website, they have images. They show one taken with a film, one taken with a filter, and you can't see the difference. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so back in World War II, the military needed a way to see through the German camouflage. So if we look at the top right image, here's a wall which had painted trees on it, a painted landscape. So airplanes couldn't see that this was actually a building. It looked like a landscape. So what they did, Kodak was able to create this Aerochrome IR film, which basically turns foliage red. So when you take a picture of this, so the reconnaissance planes would take aerial pictures and they develop them overnight, and the next day they would know what was camouflaged and what wasn't. And basically this picture on the left, there's a photographer who shoots infrared images in the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo. And these people are in camouflage. But you can see that obviously they show up like sore thumbs with Kodak Aerochrome film or with the IR chrome filter, because this photographer shoots this IR chrome filter. So that's the history behind it. It's pretty interesting. And we don't have to buy $40 a roll film now. We can actually shoot digital with this chrome IR filter. Now, because the different frequencies can see the varying amounts of visible light and or infrared, exposures tend to vary dramatically between them. So if we look at the far left, we see visible light at 100%. These are percentage based on visible being the base. So visible light is 100% of our exposure. If we're shooting with a chrome IR film, we're only getting 75% of the light. So our exposures have to increase a little bit. With 590, look at how much more we're getting, because 590 sees not only visible light, a fair amount of visible light, but it also sees infrared. So our exposures are much shorter. We have much shorter exposures. And we can see as we move down the lines at 680, 720 to 850, the exposure time is going to increase. We have 300% of the light with 680, 240 with 720, and 850 only gets about 36% because we're only seeing infrared. And I mentioned I like to shoot 850. That's my favorite. And the one thing I have to keep when I shoot an aperture priority, and the one thing I have to keep reminding myself to do is, even on a sunny day, is check my shutter speed, because it requires 3 times the exposure that visible light would. Okay, you can purchase a camera that's already been converted. We haven't talked about JPEG and RAW yet, but I'm just going to touch on it now, because when you buy a camera that's already been converted, chances are, and you have to check with the whoever did the conversion, that camera has a wide range of white balance correction, which means you can shoot JPEGs with no post-processing. One of the problems with most digital cameras, but not all, is that they don't have the white balance range. If you shoot JPEG, you have to set the white balance for every single image that has a different lighting situation. White balance is extremely critical with infrared photography. If you're shooting RAW, it's just like shooting RAW with visible light. You can do it in post-processing. But if you want to shoot JPEG with a camera, a converted camera, you have to make sure that camera has a wide enough range where you can set the white balance accurately. For instance, my Nikon, I shoot with a Nikon D3300 that I had converted. And I can tell you it does not have, and I don't think any Nikon has, a wide enough range. I don't believe that most Canon cameras have a wide enough range. So there are some that do. And I know people that shoot with point and shoot converted cameras that have a wide white balance range, and they just shoot JPEG and they get great images. So something to think about. You need to measure the white balance. You need to do a custom white balance, which is a preset white balance in Nikon, and I forget what Canon calls it. I don't remember. But you need to do a custom white balance literally for every image. If you're shooting images with the same light, you're just shooting in a different direction or a slightly different direction, you may not need to change it. But white balance is critical for JPEG. Again, RAW, you don't have to worry about it. So in-camera JPEG infrared images with no post-processing is possible. You can do it. You just have to have a camera that has a wide enough white balance correction, and you have to set it literally for every image. So a recommended conversion, this was another one of the questions. I had my conversion done by Kalari Vision, which is kalarivision.com, and I've been very happy with it. I can't, and I've had a lot of contact with them since. As a matter of fact, there were 2 questions that were asked. One was about the anti-aliasing filter, and I wasn't sure whether or not that was removed. So I just sent them an email, and literally within an hour I had an answer. They do remove it. Some conversion services use epoxy or super glue. This is a really bad idea. You should avoid these services. So I can tell you that Kalari doesn't. And, there's another service called LifePixel, and a lot of people like LifePixel as well, but I don't have any experience with them. Kalari seems to have the most availability of products. They have incredible filters. They have the IR Chrome filter. They have great phone support, and they have great email support. So I highly recommend them. We have a discount code with them also. So it's coming up later on. It's just Photobert if you put the name of my company in there. They have also partnered with a repair company that can repair converted cameras if necessary. Another question that came up was, do you void your warranty when you do this? And the answer is, for most cases, yes, you do void the warranty. So most people do this with an older camera because, I paid $200 for my D3300, and I paid $250 to have it converted. So, a $200 camera, I'm not in big time. And you don't need an expensive camera to do infrared. And you definitely don't need expensive lenses. We'll talk about that. Yeah, Kalari has great phone support. And there it is. We have a discount code. You just put Photobert in the cart. And I'm not sure what it is. I forget what they set up for us. So let's look at some sample images. Some of these images are going to cycle through a variety of filters, like the earlier one we saw. Other ones are we're just going to go through and look at each frequency as a group. So here's a visible light image. This is with 590 nanometer, 680, 720, and 850. Now, even though I prefer 850 for most images, I don't like it for this one. So what is your preference? Just yell it out.
$690.
590.
$590 for me.
I like the 590 also.
Nobody said visible, huh? Yeah, 590 is pretty spectacular. Now, I don't typically shoot 590, but with this image, I love it. And that's why I said you don't know what you're going to get. You're never really sure what your images are going to look like until you take them. So let's move on to the next image. This image is going to be different. Here's the visible. Here's 850. 720, 680, 590 doesn't look so good in this image. And here's Chrome IR. That's kind of an interesting one. In this image, what do you like? Which one do you like best?
Hearing something? Yeah. What?
720 for me.
Nice.
But Bert, did you really shoot minus 7/10 of an f-stop for all of these, given the different ranges?
When you
Yes, I did.
720.
unmute it now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's somebody talking in background. If you could mute yourself, that would be helpful. Yes, I did. I used to shoot -7 EV for every image I shoot with my infrared camera. I now shoot -1.3. I don't know if you ever heard the expression shooting for the left. Is that what it is? Shooting for the left of the histogram. So in other words, you want to underexpose because you can typically draw detail out of shadows, but it's impossible to get details out of a blown out highlight. And foliage tends to blow out really easily with infrared. So I tend to want to underexpose every image. Now it depends on your camera. Every camera is different. I know people who shoot don't need to underexpose. With my camera, I do. So I underexpose every image. By the way, look at this image here, right in this area here. I don't know if you saw it. It shows up in the IR Chrome image. I don't see it here. That's interesting. I would have expected to see it in 850 as well. But you're going to see a little flare. And it's going to be right in this area here when we get to IR Chrome. And I think we're getting there right now. See that? Flare can be a real problem with infrared photography. We're going to talk more about that as we get there, but there's just one little speck of it here. So when I was here, I shot it's a reservoir right behind it. And, I put this in there. Somebody had asked a question about this once, so I decided to do it. I actually combined multiple filtration images here. So we have some visible light, we have some 720 nanometer, I think, and we have some IR Chrome. And they're just basically layers in Photoshop. It's kind of a funky thing to do. So here's that reservoir behind that little building. And one of the things I want you to watch here is the water right in here as we move through. And you see at 590, you see some ripples in here. Watch these ripples as they increase with frequency. Whoops, I'm sorry. I went ahead. Yeah, so 720 and look at 850. Now those ripples weren't visible to the human eye. And you see the visible light, the water is almost like glass. But yet infrared is seeing something completely different. Aside from the fact that every image looks different because of the false color. Okay, again, this one is just combining multiple filtrations. I don't know. I guess I was just playing. Here's an image. This is visible light. And this next image is going to be 720 nanometer. And one of the things we see different is the shadows in the path. One of the things I find with infrared is paths look very different. Typically, paths are through grass. And with infrared, we get a very light colored grass, and paths tend to be a little darker. Look at the color of the path from visible to 720. And the shadows also seem to be more prominent. So we get a different look, aside from the fact that the colors are all different. And this is with 850. So let's go through some groupings. The next set of images are all going to be taken with 850 nanometer. So here's the first one. There's no blue sky behind these trees. It's just more foliage. So everything came out with this ethereal look. A very different look than you get with visible light. As with the shot I showed you earlier of the moon comes out especially sharp. The skies come out especially dark, which makes the moon look really, really good. Contrast is really nice with infrared. We get really nice contrast. really sharp delineation between blacks and whites. And one of the things we also get with infrared is more detail than we get with visible light photography. I will tell you that I'm shooting with a fairly inexpensive lens. It's not quite a kit lens, but it's definitely not one of the better pieces of glass Nikon makes. It's a DX sensor. And I can tell you some of these pictures will come out sharper than with the high-end 24-70 2.8 lens I shoot with my D850. Why? Because infrared sees through haze. Even though I'm pretty close to this shed, we get more detail in the wood than I might get with visible light photography. Clouds come out especially good with 850 nanometer infrared. The clouds on this day were pretty good. There wasn't much blue sky. We see a little bit of dark blue sky, but we also have a lot of detail in the clouds. Now with visible light photography, the clouds would be pretty much even. You wouldn't see a lot of detail in the clouds. And you can see this was shot at minus 1.7 EV, which is pretty much where I leave it now. Here's the same image with visible light. Very strikingly different. Taken with two different cameras. Again, paths look really good in infrared. Skin tones come out really good in infrared. And although there's no human in this picture, we have a dog, and the dog skin is really smooth. There are some photographers that do infrared portrait photography, and we're going to see some human skin with infrared, and it really comes out smooth. Unless a person has freckles come out really bad with infrared. Unless they have freckles, skin comes out really smooth, and even blemishes don't show up, which we're going to see right now. So here's an image with absolutely no blemish, even though the skin has, everybody's skin has imperfections. The skin is extremely smooth. And one thing that's interesting about this picture is those sunglasses were very dark. Infrared sees right through it. Sometimes the most colorful objects come out really good in infrared, and they come out different than you'd expect. The fact that skies come out really dark, blue skies come out really dark, makes clouds look really wonderful. But as you see, there is some blown out area here. I didn't show my exposure compensation on this one, but this is blown out here, and you can see a little bit blown out in here. And unfortunately, it's easy to do because foliage comes out white. So those are some 850 nanometer. They give you an idea what high contrast black and white looks like. It's probably my favorite. Here's 720 nanometer. And 720 has some false color. Now there's two colors we're going to see with false color. The false color we're going to see is blue skies, and typically other objects come out blue. We saw that building in front of the reservoir got a real blue tint to it. But we get a little blue sky here. And the foliage can come out yellowy orange colored, such as this. And you're seeing two images, two versions of the same image. And what's the difference between them? The difference is in Photoshop, in Adobe Camera Raw, I removed the orange yellow. I desaturated oranges and yellows. And, some people like this. I'm waiting for it to change. Why isn't it changing? Let me go back. Okay. The yellowy orange foliage here, some people like that. Some people don't. I'm not fond of it, but I do like it in some images. I actually think it works well in this image. So in one of these images, I removed the tint in the foliage. And in one of the images, obviously, I didn't. So you have that creative control. You decide, do I want it? Which way do I want it? So I happen to like the orangey yellow foliage in this image. Other images, I don't. But again, you have creative control to decide if you want it, which way you want it. This image was taken at 720 nanometer, and it really surprised me. When I took this image, I only had one infrared filter, a 720 nanometer. If I were to guess, I would guess this was taken with maybe a 680. Because what really surprised me here was this woman's hair. It came out red. Now, I have no idea what color her hair was, but I did not expect her hair to come out red. I didn't expect to see red in this image. Some 720 nanometer images will give you some red, which is a real surprise to me. We're going to see another one coming up here. So this image was shot at 720 nanometer, and there's red in this image, which typically you don't get. So as I said, some images will really surprise you. You don't know what you're going to get. You don't always know what you're going to get. Again, at the time I took this, I only had one filter. It was a 720. It wasn't till after this trip that I actually get more. And I guess I should show you my filters. Can everybody see my image?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
This, I can't see my image. So let me see here. Let me do this so I can see what you're seeing. Okay. This is my filter case. It's kind of a neat case. I got this on, not sure if I got it on Amazon or B&H. And look at the moire. Wow. And you can see there's no anti-aliasing filter on this camera. And it has a nice little belt clip. And I can put this on my belt, and I have all my filters in here. There are 6 filters here. There's a 850, a 720, a 665, a 590, a hot mirror filter, and an IR chrome filter. And this is what I go out and shoot with. This is the IR chrome filter. You can see it's kind of a blue color, which is really weird because it almost looks like a hot mirror filter, but it isn't. It's very different. This is the hot mirror filter, which is, oh, that's interesting, the way the color changes. Oh, you see my green screen. That's really weird, isn't it? I don't quite get that. Again, infrared, you never know. And then, one of these filters is red. That's kind of weird. I don't know what I'm seeing there. That's interesting. I'm not sure what I'm seeing. But in any event, you get the idea. I carry all of these with me. And basically, I get to choose whatever I want to use. And the ones I typically use most, I'd say are probably 680, well, maybe 590, 680, 720, and 850 in Chrome. I guess I use them all.
So, Bert, if you were going to buy one or two or three, what would be your prioritization between the filters of those 6 that you have?
Well, I would definitely get an 850. As I mentioned, I love shooting 850. I love the high contrast black and white. So that would be the definite one. Then I might get a 590, because if you get a 590, you can do post-processing. You can even convert 590 to black and white. And if you do that, you get something that is close to an 850. Not exact, but it's close. So, there's a train of thought that, if you only get one, you should get a 590. And that's because you can do post-processing, but, there's work involved in that to try and get it to look like different frequencies. I prefer, the 850 again, but 590, you saw one image, we saw it came out striking with 590. Other ones you're going to see, as we go through these, you're going to see the different frequencies have different results, and they all look different. 720 is is maybe the most popular. So a lot of people like 720, just a little bit of false color. In this case, we get a fair amount. It's hard to say. That's why I'm showing you all these different samples so you can decide which one you like best. But, as you saw, sometimes you like the 590, sometimes you like the 720, sometimes you like the 850.
So, Bert, when you get home, how do you remember which pictures were with which filter?
Oh, boy, do I wish that was in the EXIF information. Yes, that is a problem. Sometimes I don't. The one thing is that if you shot it with 850 or you shot it with anything else. When you shoot with 850, the image comes out magenta, has this eerie magenta tint to it. So you always know what that is. If you shoot with any other frequency, you're going to get some false color in there. It's kind of going to look like a negative, a color film negative. It's going to have that, like it had an orange mask on it. You really can't tell. So what I try to do is if I'm going to shoot with multiple, I try to shoot most things with multiple filters. And I always start low and go high. And I try and remember, there's no easy way to do it, unfortunately. Okay, here's some false color also. We got some of this reddish orange color that showed up along with the false color blue. And this is 720 nanometer. You don't always get that reddish orange color, but for some reason in this image we have it. This is 720. And, at first it surprised me because I saw the color of the foliage here, but I did this in post-processing. I kind of changed the color. There wasn't a lot of foliage. Actually, this was in the winter. You can see the trees up here have no leaves. So maybe I didn't do this in post. I'm not sure, but this almost looks like a visible light image when I look at this, but you can tell by the sky it's not.
Hey, Bert?
Yep.
Do you do in your post-processing any channel mixing or that sort of thing?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to go through post-processing and we'll talk exactly what you need to do. We'll talk about the channel swapping. Again, this is 720. Basically, we only have some, blue sky. It's false color. Another 720. And here I decided to leave the foliage yellowish. Now, one of the things that Kalari Vision also has is they have a bunch of free actions for Photoshop. So basically, whoever just asked about the channel swapping, the channel swapping is basically one click of a mouse. with the Calari Vision Action. And you can also, they have, for instance, they have two of them. One of them does the channel swap, and one of them does a channel swap and color adjustment for the yellow foliage, turns it white. So if you don't like the yellow foliage, which some people don't, it depends on the image. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. So I usually look at it both ways. But they have free actions that you can install into Photoshop and basically do a lot of the post-processing, painlessly. This is 720. And again, on this image, I'm going to guess that there was some haze and I could not see those mountains as clearly as this. But infrared tends to really get the haze out or see right through it. So here's a 680 nanometer filter, and here are some 680 nanometer images.
I like that one.
What's that?
I like that one.
Yeah, this one surprised me. I did not expect this image to come out like this. This was taken in the Florida Keys, just as you get down to Key Largo. And the water came out this incredible blue color, which really, really surprised me. And what's also surprising is in the very foreground, down here, there's water here. But it doesn't have the blue color, and you almost can't tell there's water here. Very interesting. I mean, you just don't know what you're going to get. And again, this is that, a 680 nanometer filter from that same reservoir we saw earlier. And this is with leaving the foliage very yellowish orange. And 680 gives us a lot of false color in the sky. There isn't much else to have color in this image. But you see the birch tree, which is white, has a bluish tint to it. Now, one of the things that is interesting about this bluish tint and the blue sky is that at 680 nanometer, we're actually gathering energy from 680 to 750, which is visible light, and then from 750 up, which is near infrared. Well, 680 on up, if you remember, is orange and red. And it's really rendering the sky red. But that would look pretty dumb. Therefore, somebody mentioned it, and I'll mention it again, we do something called a channel swap, which swaps red and blue. So we make the red blue and the blue red, although there is no blue, so it doesn't really change it. This is 680 nanometer, and again, we have a little bit of flare right here. Flare becomes a real big problem with infrared. I usually get rid of it, but I didn't here.
Hey, Bert,
Yep.
isn't flare more of a problem for some lenses than others?
With infrared, it's a problem for all lenses. The problem with flare is lenses, some lenses have better multi-coatings than others. Certainly some filters have better multi-coatings than others. The multi-coatings are intended to reduce reflected light, which gets rid of, flare, or can eliminate flare if there's no reflections off the lens, between the lens and the filter, for instance, or between elements of the lens. But with infrared, that multi-coating does not stop reflections of infrared. So it doesn't matter. No lens is going to eliminate flare or even mitigate it for infrared photography. 590 nanometer filters, up to now, all the filters look kind of like a dark grayish color. 590 is actually bright red. The filter itself is bright red. So this was taken with a 590 nanometer filter. And we saw that one earlier. This image was taken with 590. And you notice that the tulips, which were purple, at least the ones down here were, I shot the purple tulips in that earlier image here. And I believe they're probably all purple. Well, it doesn't matter. They're all blue. They all come out blue in the 590 nanometer image. In this image where we had the muddy water, we get this brilliant blue water, 590 nanometer. And I don't have a lot of 590 nanometer samples because I don't shoot a lot at that frequency. IR Chrome has become one of my favorite filters. And it has this really pretty blue color, but it does something really funky. It renders foliage bright red. Grass comes out sort of an orangey red. It renders things different than you'd expect. Now, everything else in this image looks normal. It's only the foliage. So in here, we have this 3-car garage. The garage is colored exactly like you see it, but the foliage is brilliant red. You have fall 365 days a year. This image was a real surprise to me because the water came out green, and I have no idea why. This was shot with an IR Chrome filter. Obviously, the foliage is bright red, but somehow this little pond came out green, and it was totally unexpected. This foliage came out sort of a yellowy orange in the foreground. And you can see in the background, it's kind of like an orangey color. And again, you have creative control. You can decide to change the hue of the reds and make them less red, maybe more orange. So you have creative control when you're dealing with infrared because nobody knows what to expect. There is no expected color anymore. In this IR Chrome image, I rendered the foliage more of an orange than red. The red looked a little bit too much in your face, although some of this foliage here is sort of a reddish color. But the barn itself, a lot of texture. As I said, you get more texture and more detail, even with an inexpensive lens, than you do with visible light photography. I find that with the IR Chrome filter, if you have too much foliage in the scene, it overwhelms the scene. So for this scene, I'm not crazy about the IR Chrome. This previous one, I really like it because the foliage isn't overwhelming. It's, we have a little bit of contrast between the barn and the foliage. In here, we have obviously blue sky and a blue sky reflection, but there's an awful lot of red. It's a little bit striking. I'm not sure I'm crazy about this image. But the nice thing about the IR Chrome filter is there's almost no post-processing. You don't have to do almost anything. Right out of the camera, you've got a decent image. And I don't shoot JPEG, so I can't say that if I shot this JPEG without white balance, that it would be, I'd have to guess it would be good because I didn't do much to this image. I did very little, maybe just check the levels, maybe a little brightness contrast, and that was about it. So, what photographs well with infrared? Well, in a word, landscapes. Landscapes are typically the things that photograph best with infrared. This is the quintessential infrared image. You have a single tree with nothing around it. One of the things that you find is that simple subjects work best. Fluffy clouds work best. Water works best. Sparse foregrounds work, and deciduous trees work. Complex scenes don't work well. So in this scene, we have a single tree. It photographed really well. There's no other trees. You know, in an invisible light, if we had 2 or 3 trees here, maybe one behind it, they may all be green, but they're going to be different shades of green. In infrared, foliage all comes out whitish. So if you have trees merging in an image, it's really bad because you can't tell where one begins, one ends. So the quintessential infrared image, landscape image, is a single tree in a landscape, and they're really hard to find. I constantly look for single trees in the middle of a field or whatever, and I don't often find them. This was a 720 nanometer, and the interesting thing is the sky up here really doesn't have a lot of color. It is sort of a bluish tint, but you'd almost might think it's black. Down here you can see a little bit more blue, and you've got a little stream running here, and it's blue. It came out blue. So we have a little bit of false color in this, even though it almost looks like a black and white image, unless you look closely. But the thing you want to do with infrared is you don't want to take complex scenes. Then it work well. Simple scenes work best. Water works really well with infrared. Water and clouds really work well, and sparse foliage. That would be the algorithm I'd give you for shooting infrared. And again, unlike visible light photography, midday is great. Look at the detail in this building. Again, this is taken with a low-end consumer camera, with a low-end consumer lens, and we get incredible detail. As good as, my D850 with a 2470, maybe better. And this is 850 nanometer. I just love the detail you get with infrared. Here's an image taken with water vapor. So we have this pier way off in the distance, and I basically am showing you 2 versions of it, one with visible light photography and one with infrared, black and white infrared, 850 nanometer. And you can see how much more detail you get. And I mean, this is a tiny, tiny portion of this image, but you can see how much more detail you get with the infrared. And if we look at this image, which we saw earlier, the mountains in the background are barely distinctive. You can almost just barely see a line between. You can see here where it is, but here they all kind of blend together. And this is what happens when you get on top of a mountain and there's a lot of haze, which there almost always is. This is the image in infrared. It's not a great image, but I actually like the visible image better. But look at the mountains. Look at the detail we have in the mountains here. And let's go back again. And this is what visible light sees. So we can cut through haze, both water vapor and air, air haze. And again, here's that image that shows the difference. And here's that, you saw this image earlier, and you can see the difference between the normal photography, the visible light, and the infrared. A lot more detail in that chimney. With skin tones, this image is visible light, and this image is infrared. Now, the first thing to notice about this is there are two things to notice about the first two images. The visible light, look at the sunglasses, and look at the sunglasses in the 850 nanometer. We see right through them. We also get reflection. If we didn't see the reflection, we could see the eyes clearly. The third image is basically the first image, the visible light image, converted to black and white. And look at the skin tone difference. So on the right, we see the visible light, the infrared, and the visible converted to black and white. The skin tones are very smooth with infrared, extremely smooth. Little imperfections don't show up in infrared. For instance, a little imperfection right here. You can see it, and you can see it in the black and white. You cannot see it in the infrared. So it's kind of interesting. Humans and dogs, as you saw the dog image earlier, come out really beautifully with infrared. And look at the sweatshirt, the color of the sweatshirt, how different it looks. It's much lighter in the visible light, and the infrared, it's got a much darker tone. And the hair is also different, very different, much softer looking in the infrared. Okay, here are some of the tools and techniques I use, and I find them indispensable. The first one, if you use a mirrorless camera, you can use either the EVF or the electronic viewfinder or the LCD, because they're both basically showing you a representation of what's on the sensor. But if you're using a DSLR, if you're using a DSLR, you must use the LCD, which can be very difficult in bright light. So the question is, why must you use the LCD? And the answer is because when you look through the viewfinder and you have an 850 nanometer filter in front of your lens, it's only letting in infrared. You can't see a thing through the viewfinder. Can't see anything. Not only that, but the exposure system, the auto exposure system, is working on what's coming off the mirror. And what's coming off the mirror is not visible. Therefore, it can't give you an exposure. It's going to grossly overexpose everything. Autofocus can't work either. Okay. If you have a single frequency conversion, you can shoot through the viewfinder. Okay. Because basically what's coming through the lens is visible light, and you will be able to shoot. But with a DSLR, you have to use the LCD on the back, which can be impossible in sunlight. When I first got my conversion, I went out on a sunny day. It was in the winter. It was in December. And I went out and I started shooting with the LCD. And I realized I couldn't see what I was shooting. I couldn't see anything on the LCD. It was too bright. The sun was too bright. I ended up aiming the camera in the general direction of what I wanted to shoot and taking pictures. And I was lucky if I got anything. It was at that point I realized that I needed what I'm going to show you next. Basically, I use something called the XIT Elite Series Locking LCD Viewfinder. Boy, it's a mouthful. It makes shooting in daylight easy. So here's my camera. If you can see my image, I need to open this up so I can see my own image here. Okay. So this is my camera. Okay. There's a 850 nanometer filter on there. We'll take it off, put it on. This is the other next thing I'm going to show you. But this guy right here This guy right here is the XIT Elite Series Locking Viewfinder. And what it does is it attaches to the back of the camera. You can see that it has this elastic right here, goes over the pentaprism. And it's on the bottom, it screws onto the tripod socket. And basically you look through here. So let's turn this on. I'm going to show you a picture that I took today. You're going to see later on in the presentation. I think I'm going to be able to do this. Look at that. So when you look through here, you're looking at the viewfinder magnified 3.5 times. You're looking through a lens. It magnifies the viewfinder, and it makes shooting in the day because it's got a nice big eye cup on it. And you basically put this right up to your eye, and you can shoot in daylight without any issue. It's really a wonderful thing to have. So that's the first thing I'm going to show you that is really, really useful. I will tell you that this thing cost me, when I bought it, it was about, I don't know, $27, I think. I bought it at B&H. Then B&H, the price jumped to about $60. And it keeps changing. Different whenever you see it. You can still get it on Amazon pretty cheap. But let me show you the next thing that I find really useful. And I've been using this for many, many years. This is called the Xume system, Xume. It was invented by a fellow who I bought it from initially, and he ended up selling out to Manfrotto, and they sell it now. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it on B&H. And basically, in order to put a filter on my lens, I don't have to screw it on. Probably the worst thing in photography that ever happened to anybody is when you put a filter on and you cross-thread it. It is nasty. And putting filters on is horrible. Well, not for me, because there it is. That's how I put my filters on. It's magnetic. There's a very slim device that fits on the lens. There's another very slim device that fits on the filter, and presto. You can put you can change filters in an instant without any grief. And as I said, I've been using this for probably close to 10 years, and I love it. It's probably one of the best things I ever got in photography.
Hey, Bert, how do you spell or say the whole word for that again?
It's on the presentation. If you look at it, Xume. And basically, you get a lens adapter and you get a filter adapter. Filter adapter goes onto your filter. Lens adapter goes on your lens. And they also have lens caps, which is basically magnetic, so you can just plop it right on. Now, I will tell you, it's not cheap. It's not terribly expensive. Depends on how many lenses and filters you have. But a lens adapter, I shoot 82 millimeter filters. Basically, every one of my lenses has a step-up adapter from whatever the filter size is on the lens to 82 millimeter, because 82 millimeters, my largest lens is 82 millimeter. And I only buy, for instance, I only have one polarizer. It's an 82 millimeter. And it works on and it has a filter adapter on it. So it works on any of my lenses. The lens adapters for 82 millimeter, and I believe they vary in price by size. The 82 millimeter, which is the most expensive, is $34 for a lens adapter. It's $14 for the filter adapter. So, and I don't remember what the lens caps go for, but so it's not a cheap thing, but I'll tell you, it saves so much grief. And if you're shooting infrared with a lot of filters, it's invaluable. Now, I'm going to tell you one other thing about filters. When I first got my conversion with Kolari, I got the conversion and I got a 720 filter. So a 720 nanometer, 82 millimeter filter cost me about $150 with Kolari. It's a lot of money. All their filters, and again, they're priced by size. So smaller diameter filters are considerably less money. I think they start at $50-something and they go up to $150 based on size. I didn't want to buy a lot of filters at $150 each. So I went out on Amazon and I found a filter manufacturer, and I wonder if I have the name here. I can't remember the name offhand. No, that one I got a Kalari. Let's see. It's okay. It's ZOMEI. 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 And it was about, I don't know, $30. And for the most part, I've bought cheap filters in the past. It's usually a bad idea. However, I have shot, the 720 Zomei and the 720 Kalari, a $30 filter versus a $150 filter, and I cannot see any difference. They're identical as far as I can tell. So for the most part, you don't have to buy expensive filters. I don't recommend you buy expensive filters. I mentioned you can shoot, if you're using a tripod in long exposures, you can shoot infrared with a non-converted camera. If you want to get your feet wet, I recommend you go out to Amazon, you buy a $30 infrared filter, put it on your camera, and try some sample exposures. You're going to have to play around with the exposure, but you're going to find that they need to be long, but you can probably get some decent pictures. So again, if you're taking foliage, it can't be a windy day because they're going to be long exposures. But for the most part, you can shoot it that way, and you don't have to buy expensive filters. So I don't recommend you spend a lot of money on filters. So JPEG versus RAW. White balance is absolutely critical for getting good IR shots. As with visible light photography, you can choose to do white balance in post-processing if you're shooting RAW, or you need to do it in camera if you're doing JPEG. So if you're shooting JPEG, you need to use your camera's preset manual or custom white balance feature for every lighting situation, even if you're shooting black and white 850 nanometer. Green grass is a perfect outdoor target for setting the white balance for IR photography. So if you're shooting RAW, you're going to need to do post-processing. White balance doesn't need to be set for infrared photography when you're shooting RAW, as you can do it during post, just as you can with regular RAW images. But Photoshop and Lightroom don't have the white balance range necessary for IR. It has to be done in 2 steps. I'm not sure you can do it in Lightroom Classic. I believe this actually has to be done. I don't use Lightroom. I use Photoshop exclusively. But if you're not aware of it, Lightroom Classic and Photoshop, the plugin for Photoshop called Adobe Camera Raw, are identical. If you're shooting Adobe Camera Raw in Photoshop, it's exactly what you get in Lightroom. But the difference is, in Photoshop, you can also use Adobe Camera Raw as a filter. And that's what you need to do here. So the idea is, when you open up a raw image, raw infrared image in Adobe Camera Raw, which is the equivalent of Lightroom, but again, in Lightroom, the second step is going to have to be done in Photoshop. You have to basically set the temperature and tint all the way down to the bottom. And this is because Photoshop doesn't have the range necessary. And neither does Lightroom. So what we have to do is go back in here. So we set it all the way down to the bottom. And basically, so let's go through the process. Here's an image I initially opened in Photoshop. This was a 720 nanometer image. You can see this is exactly the way it opened up. And you can see this red tint. You cannot see any color in here. There's no idea that there is any color in here. However, once you open it, you need to adjust the white balance and tint to the minimum. So we look at the temperature and tint right over here, and we see that we basically move the sliders all the way down. So the image now looks like this. It's not black and white yet. We don't see any pure white in here. And the idea is we want these, for instance, this tree, these grasses, whoops, I keep clicking by accident. We want them to be white, pure white, but they're not. But we got these all the way down. So the next step is to open it in Photoshop. So we open it, I clicked again by accident. So we open it up in Photoshop, and we need to readjust the color. We need this to be white. So we go into the filter menu, to the Camera Raw filter, or you can use Shift Control A, which is the way I get in there. And you go back into Adobe Camera Raw. And at that point, you take the white balance dropper, white balance tool, and you click on anything that should be white, for instance, the grass. Once you do that, it changes the white balance so that it's proper. Okay, and now this was a 720 nanometer, so there's some false color in here. And we can see a difference when we didn't get a pure black. If this was an 850 nanometer image, we would have pure black and white at this point. The whole image would be black and white. But we see some color in here, but we don't know what the color is yet. So at this point, we open up the image. IR filters have a red tint, so images come out with that initial red tint. The red tint is removed in Photoshop using the channel mixer. So to do this in Photoshop, we have to go to Adjustments, Channel Mixer. And once we choose that, we're going to get a dialog where we're going to need to swap red and blue channels. Now, if this seems complicated, it isn't, because it's basically one click. But I'm going to show you the process, and then I'm going to show you the one click. So we come into the channel mixer, and this is what we see. We see the output channel, and if we drop this down, we're going to see red, green, and blue. And we first choose the red channel. And you see the red channel starts off at 100%. The blue channel and the green channel are 0, because the red, we want 100% of the reds, and we don't want any other colors in the reds, in the pure reds. However, what we're going to do now is we're going to swap the red and the blue channels. So what we do is, and by the way, this can be automated with a free Photoshop action from Kalari Vision, and I give you the link here. If you go on their website, you can search for it. And that makes it easy, but I'm going to go through the process just so you see what happens. So we take the red channel, which starts off at 100, and we change it to 0. We take the blue channel, which starts off at 0, and we change it to 100. So we've basically swapped the red channel to become blue. We then drop down this drop down here, and instead of red, we choose blue. And blue starts off at 100% blue and 0 red. Well, we swap them. We make red 100%. We make blue 0 on the blue channel. So at this point, we've swapped red and blue in this image. Okay. After the channel swap, we can do calibration, color mixer, color grading in Adobe Camera Raw. I find these especially useful for fine-tuning the color. So you have calibration. If you've never used calibration in Adobe Camera Raw or in Lightroom Classic, you need to use it. It is probably one of the most useful tools for getting color right in images. It's basically meant to calibrate your sensor. So every image you take, the colors need calibration. And basically by changing these around, you can improve the colors in your images. But that's another topic. The color mixer allows you to, and if in the color mixer, if I wanted to you know, in a 720 nanometer image, if I had foliage that was bright, you know, kind of a orangey yellow, and I didn't like it, I could just reduce the saturation of orange, reduce the saturation of yellow, and I would basically create white foliage. And that's how you do that. Color grading, you can use that to improve the image color. And these three apply to any image, even visible light in Photoshop or Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom Classic, either one.
Yeah. They've added that color grading to Lightroom recently as well.
Yeah, color grading came in version 13. And, you know, I don't find color grading terribly useful. They replaced the, what do they call that? The dual, oh, I forget what it was. What they call it, what it used to be called. It used to be called when you change the color of the shadows and change the colors of the highlights. Whatever that tool was called, I forget what it was called. They replaced it with color grading, which basically gives you the shadows and highlights. We can change the colors, but it also gives you midtones. But I never used the dual. I wish I could remember the name of it. In any event, yeah, it's fairly new, but I don't use this too much. But color mixer and calibration, extremely useful. A lot of people completely ignore calibration, and you shouldn't. So this was the starting image. On the left, the red tinted image, and on the right, this is how I ended up. And all I did in here was a color swap. I got the white balance correct. I did a color swap. And literally I just I clicked once to do the color swap. And I tweaked it with, you know, brightness, contrast, levels, the colors, whatever, got it right. And this is what I ended up with. So it's not hard. You just have to do it. You know, if you're doing black and white, it's a lot easier. You don't have to do if you're shooting 850 nanometer, you do not have to do the color swap, the color channel swap. All you have to do is get the white balance right, and then you can tweak it just the way you tweak any image. If you're shooting IR chrome, basically, all you have to do is tweak it. You don't have to do anything else. IR chrome is really easy. You have creative control. This image is going to, you're going to see 4 different versions of this image. It's the same exact image, but it's processed 4 different ways. You'll see differences in the sky. You'll see differences in the foliage color, in the color of the stairs. You're going to see just differences in the way it's processed. And you can make one image look many different ways based on how you want to do it. If you reduce the saturation of blues in this image, and if you do a local adjustment, you can make the stairs look, you know, neutral colored, and you can remove the blue from there. It depends on how you want to do it. But this is a 590 nanometer image processed 4 ways. So the question somebody asked before was, if you had one filter to get, what would you get? Well, if you get a 590 nanometer, then you can post-process it and make it look how you want. It's just going to be, you know, a little more work in post. Okay, things to consider. There are some things you need to consider in infrared photography. The first one we'll talk about is hotspots. Lenses are designed for visible light, not infrared. As far as I know, there's no lens that's designed for infrared. So some lenses create hotspots. This is a worst case example. And this, I didn't shoot this. I got this off the internet. I've never had anything like this. But I can tell you this, is that the lens I have on my camera right now is let's see, I don't even remember what it is. It's a 10 to 24 millimeter f3.5 to f4.5. So it's a 10 to 24, 3.5 to 4.5. It's a DX APS-C sensor, so it's a 1.5 crop factor, so that's the equivalent of 15 to 36 millimeter. roughly. I like wide angle, and I think wide angle works really well with infrared. I will tell you this lens that I got, I was lucky because I wasn't sure what lens to get. There are lens hotspot databases that you can go onto and look for which lenses work best. I found that they're not exactly right. But I also have found that expensive lenses tend to work worst. I have a 24-70 to f2.8 lens. I put this on my infrared camera and I get a bad hotspot. I put other lenses on there, other high quality lenses I have, I get a hotspot. Kit lenses tend to work well for some reason. Kit lenses tend to not generate hotspots. Some lenses will create the hotspots. Pro lenses aren't necessarily better than consumer lenses. It just depends on the lens. There are lens hotspot databases that I identify at the end of the presentation that are available to identify potentially good and poor performers. But just because somebody says it's good doesn't mean it's good. Hotspots tend to vary by aperture. So here's 5 images showing a hotspot. At f5.6, we see it very diffused. But as we get narrower, smaller aperture, at f22, we see an extremely focused hotspot. So I tend not to shoot at, I don't like shooting at, small apertures anyway because of diffraction, but I tend to shoot almost every image I take with infrared at f8 or f9. The reason for that is because number one, if I'm going to get a hotspot, f8 isn't too bad. Another reason is because infrared focuses slightly differently. If I have a problem with focusing, f8 is going to give me enough depth of field, especially with a wide angle lens, so I'm not going to have to worry about focus too much. And I've never had a problem. So I almost shoot everything at f8. Kind of weird. Here's an example. Now, if you look at the image at the top right, in this area, it's going back and forth, okay? It's going to come back in a second. Here it is. You see sort of a pinky area in the middle here? This is a hotspot. Then you see it go away, okay? And the way I got rid of it was simple. I basically used the radial filter in Adobe Camera Raw, which is also in Lightroom Classic, and I darkened the inside area a little bit and adjusted the clarity and white balance inside the radial filter. And basically, you can see what it did. It got rid of this pinky hotspot in the middle, and it made it nice and neutral, and you can't even tell there was a hotspot there. So if you get a hotspot, you can always get rid of it in post-processing. Okay, flare. We talked about this a little bit. Flare is a big issue with infrared. So here's 2 images. The one on the left, they were both taken with the same camera, same lens. One was taken with a hot mirror filter, and one was taken with a 720 nanometer filter. And look at the difference in flare. It's dramatic. The multi-coatings on the lens eliminated the flare for the visible light photography, but it could not do anything for the reflections between the elements of the lens with infrared. So flare is a real concern. I found that I can shoot into the sun if I block the sun with an object, such as a tree. So one of the things I like doing is, and I always like doing this in visible light photography, is I like shooting backlit subjects when the sun is directly behind a tree, for instance, and it gives you nice long shadows. If I shoot that way with infrared, I don't get flare, as long as the sun is completely covered by the tree. But if we don't have any protection, you're going to get really bad flare. And I don't shoot with lens hoods. I hate lens hoods. I know most of you probably shoot with lens hoods. I hate them. Why do I hate them? Because they're mostly plastic. They break real easily. They fall off. They're getting better. I mean, the Nikon ones have gotten better with recent lenses, but
Question, Bert.
yeah.
Will a lens hood even fit over those magnetic zoom adapters?
Actually, it depends on the lens. Yeah, I have, for instance, my 24-70. I can put a filter on that, and the lens hood will fit over the filter. Not if I step it up though. My 24-70 happens to have an 82 millimeter lens fitting, so I can do it with that one. But if I had a lens with a 52 millimeter filter size and I stepped it up to 82, no, I wouldn't be able to do it. So, but I use my hand. My hand is an awfully good flare killer, and it's an awfully good lens hood, and it doesn't break usually. If it does, I'm going to be in a lot of pain. But my hand tends to work really well. But even with infrared, it's going to be really hard to block flare. So the aperture, I mentioned this, I typically use a middle aperture to get reasonable depth of field and a minimal hotspot. It also may help with focusing, but typically that's not a problem because I'm shooting with live view, and my focus will always be accurate with live view. So the thing to consider, you need to determine what type of conversion to do. You have the choice of one frequency, which you can shoot one frequency without a filter, or you can shoot higher frequencies with a filter, but you can't shoot normal images. Or you get full spectrum, where you can shoot normal, infrared, or ultraviolet, but a filter is required for every image you shoot. Or you can get what I did, two spectrum. You can shoot normal or IR. You just can't shoot ultraviolet. But, ultraviolet isn't something that you're probably going to want to do. A filter is required for all images. The only reason I can think of shooting ultraviolet is if you do astrophotography. In astrophotography, you may want to capture ultraviolet. If you don't want to do channel swaps, you need to shoot 850 nanometer. That gives you black and white. You don't have to swap red and blue. If you shoot JPEG, you need to set custom white balance when shooting. If you're shooting JPEG. But again, not all cameras have enough white balance range. With my D3300, I cannot set the white balance and shoot JPEG and get a decent image because it just doesn't have the white balance range. If you shoot RAW, you don't have to set a custom white balance when shooting. But you do have to do it in post. If you want to shoot false color, you need to do post-processing to swap the red and blue channels. And you need to shoot something lower than 850 nanometer. Speed lights. I didn't have this. I put this in here just for you guys because somebody asked a question about speed lights, and frankly, I never thought about it. And speed lights do emit infrared. I can tell you LED lights do not emit any infrared. So you cannot use LED lights for infrared photography. But speed lights do emit infrared as well as visible. Shooting can be really, really difficult. Matter of fact, it can be impossible because you can't see what you're shooting unless you use a sports finder to guess what you're shooting. The reason for this is because when you look at this, when you're using live view or you have a mirrorless camera and you're looking at the LCD or the electronic viewfinder, you're only infrared is coming in. And if you're in a dark room or a reasonably dark room, there's no infrared. So you can't see anything. You're not going to see a thing. So I went out and I went to my office and I shot a picture, and it's in your handout. And the picture I'm going to show you now is not the same picture. I changed it tonight, actually, just before the presentation. But the one you have, I shot just my desktop, something on my desk. and I shot it with at night, and I had an 850 nanometer filter on, and I couldn't see anything. I had no idea what I was shooting. So I pre-focused and I shot the picture, and it came out. I mean, I got a decent picture out of it, but I had no idea what I was shooting. I couldn't see. So it's going to be very difficult to shoot with a speed light. Exposures can be tricky. You're going to have to play around. I ended up having to use -3 exposure compensation. There are specialized flash units that you can buy that emit infrared, only infrared, or a lot of it. But some of the companies that make them have gone out of business. I don't think I don't think there's a lot of units around you could buy. But a regular speed light, I used an SP5000, a Nikon SP5000, and it was fine. Matter of fact, it was almost too bright. So this was the image. Oh, that's interesting. I thought I changed this. Oh, I did change it, but I didn't download the new version of it on this computer. That's interesting. Okay. Well, in any event, this is the one you have in your handout. Basically, I shot this with an SP5000. I shot at 18 millimeter. I shot it at f/22, a 60th of a second, ISO 100, flash exposure compensation -3. And I had to manually focus and aim in the general direction of the subject because I could not see what I was shooting. So you can do it, but I'm not sure how good it is. I'll show you another image I shot when we're done here. Conversion may disable a manufacturer's warranty, okay? Because, it depends. If you were to send your camera in for repair, I guess it would depend on the repair. If the repair had to do with the sensor, it would probably disable, they probably wouldn't do it. But if it had something to do with, maybe the shutter button or, something else, they may cover it. I don't know. But third-party shops are used by some of the conversion companies. Kalari Vision has their own repair company that works with them that can perform repairs. And I'm told they can even repair Nikon. So yeah, and Kalari offers a 1-year warranty on their conversions. You can do IR emulation. It's kind of interesting. This came up from a question from somebody in one of my workshops. That can you achieve the IR look with visible light photography? And the answer is you kind of can. This is a best case scenario. So here's the 850 nanometer IR image, and this is the visible light image, and these are the settings I did to basically convert the hue and saturation and the black and white conversion, and basically this is what I got. Pretty close. It's pretty close. Not exact, but pretty close. I was kind of amazed at how well this came out, actually. So you can kind of emulate black and white IR. Color is a little more difficult. So here's a typical conversion. This is the IR image. This is the visible light image. And this is the conversion. And you see this blue in the sky, but obviously nothing like the IR image. So although you can kind of emulate black and white IR a little bit with visible light images, it's pretty tough to do with false color. Again, here's another one, and this is a best case scenario. These are the settings I changed, and this is the result I got. Not exactly the same, but it's somewhat close. By the way, one of the problems I have shooting infrared with filters, and especially with the zoom system, is the zoom system has a filter an adapter that goes on the lens, Also has an adapter that goes on the filter. So it actually is pushing the filter out from the lens a slight amount by about 1/4 of an inch. So you can see in this image, I have a little vignette up here, and there's a little vignette up here. Depending, if I'm shooting a 15 millimeter, I definitely get vignetting. Somewhere around 20 millimeter, I stop getting vignetting. So, I shoot extreme wide angle. And with that, you can run into some vignetting, but you can always fill the corners in if you need to with content aware fill in Photoshop. So here are some references. I have on my website some e-tips, and I have 2 e-tips. One is getting started with infrared. One is post-processing with infrared. These links will take you there, and I've got a lot of information on infrared there. Kalari Vision has a bunch of tutorials. Oh, I think that's spelt wrong. Could be spelled that way on the website. I don't know. I probably would have copied it from the website, but tutorials. Well, in any event, they're tutorials, and maybe it's on a page called tutorials. But Kalari Vision has them. LifePixel has them. They have some guides that you can use, as well as on these are on one of my websites. There's 2 lens hotspot databases that I know of, one from Kalari Vision, one from LifePixel. If you go to Kalari Vision, you can get a discount in the cart by putting PhotoBurt in the cart. And a PDF, you already have the PDF of this presentation. There's a few pages that aren't in the PDF, and that's only because they're animated pages, and you can't show an animation in a PDF. Here's my contact information. If you have questions about shooting infrared or anything about it, feel free to contact me. And I always end my workshops with an expression from Maya Angelou, who passed away a couple years ago now, I think. And I love this expression of hers. You can't use up creativity, because the more you use, the more you have. Keep shooting. And I hope you find infrared photography a wonderful new creative outlet if you're not shooting it yet. So that's about it. I am going to, let's see, while I have you here, I will show you the one other flash picture I took. Let's see. I gotta find it first. Well, maybe I'm not gonna find it. No, I don't see it. Hold on. Okay. There it is. This was a flash picture I took. Can you see that? The tulips?
Yes.
Okay. That's a flash picture I took tonight, just before I did the workshop. They're actually white tulips on a black background. And that was taken with flash. And it actually came out pretty good. And I was actually able to see it because I have this was taken on my kitchen table. And my kitchen, right above the kitchen table, is a halogen lamp. And halogen lamps do emit infrared. So I was able to use the light from the halogen lamp to focus and compose it. Otherwise, I would have been blind. So it actually came out pretty good. I had to use minus 2 or 3 flash exposure compensation, before I could get it to expose properly. So infrared with flash is interesting. It's something I may pursue a little more, but I was surprised at actually how good this came out.
Bert, I have a question about histograms. When you're trying to compose and get the right exposure, do you have to ignore the histogram, or is it still safe to try to keep within the 0 to 255 range?
To be honest with you, I ignore histograms. Histograms lie. I shoot raw. And when you're looking at the histogram, you're looking at an image, at a histogram of a JPEG image that the camera has processed. So it's not necessarily correct. So I try to ignore them. I literally find that I'm able to underexpose every image by about 1.3 EV, and I never have a problem. I never look back on my exposure. They just come out perfect. So I like to keep things simple, and I find that keeps it very simple.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Bert, this is Joe. You had said something about straight lenses versus zoom. I've got a 24-120 Nikon. Is that a okay lens to do?
Well, you should check the hotspot database, but I believe that's one of the better lenses. I think I remember seeing that for that lens. I didn't mention prime lenses versus zoom lenses specifically. I shoot with a zoom lens. It's a 10-24, and occasionally I will put a longer lens on there. My wife shoots with a 24-80 f2.8 lens, and sometimes I'll put that on there, and that works pretty well. And I've also put a 300 f4 on there, and that's worked well. So, I haven't had too many problems. I have a 24-85 f3.5 to f4.5 lens, which I absolutely love. It's a Nikon lens. It's a consumer lens, but it's a small, compact, great travel lens, 24-85 FX lens. And I've shot with that. Oh no, it's not. I don't know if it's an FX lens. It must be a DX lens, because I've shot with that on my. But that created terrible hotspots. I had horrible hotspots with that. So, it depends. As I said, the 24-70 gives me hotspots as well.
Thanks.
Anybody have anything to add? I know some of you shoot infrared. No? Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I hope it was valuable to you. And as I said earlier, we'll have a video on YouTube. Should be up there tomorrow by about noontime-ish. I will send Fred an email with the link. And, Fred, you can distribute it to everyone.
Sounds good. Thank you, Bert. I want to say this is the second time for me sitting through this presentation. I even learned more the second time because it's a lot to take in, but with that video, I'll probably take notes from it. Yeah, all these workshops are a lot to take in. I generally present a lot of information. I have a workshop that I taught last Saturday, which was 3.5 hours, and it's basically a basic digital photography course, but we cover everything, cover a lot of information. And, nobody could ever absorb it all. So, I like the idea of you're teaching it, what, in six pieces, I think you said? Say one more time. You're teaching a digital 6-part session, on introduction to photography, right?
Yeah, and you almost need to do that because it's so much to take in. But the video helps because you can always go back to the video and review anything you missed.
I want to
So
mention, Bert, you didn't say it, but I'll put in a plug that your store, you sell all kinds of little accessories for cameras like bean bags and straps and a zillion little things that they're reasonably priced, and I've bought a number of them to put in my camera bag. So I just put a plug out there for you.
yeah, well, we sell uh, we sell a very small number of accessories, and they're only accessories that I use or I like. If I don't like it, I won't sell it. I mean, I know it sounds, I don't want to sound pompous, but I don't like selling stuff that I don't like or I don't believe in. So we sell only a small number of items, and that number of items has gone down over the years because we used to sell a great camera strap, a phenomenal camera strap. I have it on all my cameras, but I can't get them anymore. The company PackSafe stopped making them. It's a great travel strap, a great strap for any time, but can't get them anymore. So we don't sell those. And slowly, and you probably all know that the photography industry is kind of dying. It's dying a very slow death. And, a lot of companies have stopped making things. Companies are going out of business. It's hard to get decent stuff. And most of the stuff is coming out of China now. And it's basically, some of it's good, some of it's not so good. But we try to sell only, useful things.
Well, I find your cheat sheets very helpful because there's just so many buttons and dials and menu items in a camera to try to know them all.
Yeah, we've been selling those since '96, and like everybody else, our sales are going down because people aren't buying the cameras anymore. Who knows if Nikon is even going to survive in the camera industry? But Sony seems to. How many people? Anybody shooting Sony here?
Got one there.
One there. Yeah, I mean, Sony has really outpaced Canon and Nikon. So, who knows what's happening with, and the future of this industry is software. It's not hardware. So that's going to make a big change, and the cell phone industry is changing the photography industry by coming up with really inventive software. And that's what's going to be the difference in cameras. It's not going to be the hardware. It's going to be the software. So, okay. Thank you again. And I wish you all well. Stay safe, and enjoy spring.
Thank you, Bert.
Okay. Bye-bye.